Hello, everyone, and welcome to the last session today for the FinCloud Security Summit. I hope you have enjoyed all of the sessions and discussions around FinCloud security in the generative AI and cloud space. Today, we have learned a lot of things about DORA, about AI and its applicability. One of the things that I wanted to do right now is just capture what I took away from this summit and noticing that there's quite a bit of investment that's happening in this space. We see that according to the Enterprise Strategy Group, in their recent survey, 72% of all financial institutions have generative AI initiatives already in production or in a proof of concept stage. And we see that 64% in the same survey are planning for their generative AI budget to increase in the next 12 months. All that to say, there is a lot of planning around the security, efficacy, and resiliency of this technology, just like we've done for the last 15 plus years in cloud security. So with that, I look at what I learned in these lessons, in these sessions, I should say, and it really comes down to three things. First, there's this evolving risk that may require us to think about our third-party risk management practices differently. The second is we have new regulation attempting to address immediately these risks and try to curb some of the potential issues around privacy, efficacy, and bias of the technology. And then we see this opportunity with all of these demands and pressures of new threats, the opportunity for resiliency and security with generative AI. And you saw that this week in the conversations. The cyber threat trends in artificial intelligence talked about some of these risks in AI. You heard from an executive panel of CISOs that was all about how do we communicate effectively these new risks into a boardroom. And then from Justin McCarthy, you also heard about continuous authorization and how on cloud, on-prem, regardless of the environment, how we go about creating this integrity of the authenticity of all the connections that we're working with. From a regulation perspective, you heard about pool auditing and some of the ways that in Europe, financial institutions are collaborating to try to collectively address the compliance. You heard from our DORA panel that just went into effect last month on January 17th, and how financial institutions are working alongside cloud service providers. And from a resiliency perspective, you also heard from the CISO from DTCC, Inés Nunez, who talked with our Chief Research Officer, John Yo, and talked about how there is this opportunity in the financial service space to really get ahead of some of that regulation. We also heard about control automation as code from Google Cloud and from AWS about how instant payments not only is increasing across the globe, but how we're addressing it from a cloud security perspective. So with all of that in mind, I'm going to look at it from my lens and looking at some of the research that we've produced, how it really relates to what this conversation meant to me. And first, I'd love to emphasize with generative AI, we've done so much research that is applicable in the financial service space. One of those research papers that I'd like to call out is our AI organizational responsibilities. And within this, what I like about this and the themes that came across in this research in particular was that traditional risk management is going to be similar, but it also is going to be different. We're going to need more comprehensive auditing to assess the entire AI lifecycle, the security and privacy and efficacy of these large language models that we're applying. We're going to have a different type of risk-based approach, very proactive in the identification and mitigation, especially around agentic AI and how it's being used autonomously. And we're going to have to think differently about the supply chain, the vendor assessments. How do we collect this bill of materials for software AI? And then with that, taking these critical actions around our infrastructure, around the data protection, and then continuously evaluating as new models come to market. And because this is more a predictive than definitive type of process, as new updates happen, it could radically change the outcomes and the outputs that we expect. And that can be very difficult to meet financial regulation and still try to be so innovative. So these are things we have to be thinking about going forward. We also look at some of these traditional controls that we've had and we've built over the last 5, 10, 15 years and recognize that some of this is just simply not going to be as effective. We see that deepfake has been able to biofish and spoof our voice, our video resemblance, and you start to see, like the case in Hong Kong, $25 million being siphoned out of a financial entity because of all of the ability to record just a minute or two of video and be able to replicate the image and the inflection of voice that a CFO might have. We also see it's going to be much easier to detect software and crypto vulnerabilities. So we're going to have this broader and more quickly advancing type of attack surface that's going to be known to malicious attackers. And what it's going to allow is this emergence of more dynamic denial of service attacks. We're going to see a volume of threat actors increase significantly. So you may be aware of all of the fraud GPT, wolf GPT, worm GPT, all of these malicious transformers that are in the market, so that now people that did not have any type of background in technology and no acumen to build code can actually be a disgruntled customer and go into the dark web and be able to create a lot of havoc and malicious code as a result of the accessibility to this type of AI. So with that, I also think about how the agentic AI is really going to be something that is truly transformative, how we operate in a financial service entity, in an enterprise. We're going to see a lot of that autonomy that is going to come. We're going to be leveraging cloud, and in these large language models, I think are going to leverage that dynamic resource allocation. There's going to be extensive processing capabilities that only cloud is going to be able to truly provide in this multi-tenant type of environment. And we're also going to see that we're going to have a lot more of communication, this neural networks communicating directly with localized resources, probably APIs and AI assistants. And with that, there's just going to be a growing use case for agents of AI agents to be leveraged. We're going to see that the co-pilots and all these other types of technologies are really going to facilitate and streamline a lot of our daily activities that might seem laborious, and now they're going to be very easy and possibly better consolidated. But with that becomes a whole bunch of challenges around the autonomy that we give to AI. The first, when I think about these threat vectors for agentic AI, is around the impersonation and privilege escalation that could happen, right? We could have AI agents that potentially masquerade as authorized entities, and so they can escalate privileges or have access to escalated privileges beyond what their assigned role would be with an internal employee, for example. And this could lead to unauthorized access across multiple systems and data sources, getting access to sensitive financial data. The second threat I think of is the unauthorized API access and the token theft. You could see these compromised AI API tokens that are going to be able to allow malicious actors to hijack sessions of AI agents. And once they gain that, of course, then it's game over. They could persist across multiple interactions and systems. And then the last Obviously, something that we've been focused on financial services for a long time is the data exfiltration via prompt injection. And we sometimes scoff at prompt injection and say, well, this is something that a lot of these large language models have resolved. But you got to think that there's multiple layers of software that will be interacting with the large language models. And so we could have sophisticated prompt manipulation that's happening that would actually trick the AI agents into revealing sensitive information or executing some type of unauthorized commands. And so these threats are particularly dangerous as it explores the natural language processing capabilities of AI to be able to, again, not have a lot of technical acumen, but be able to manipulate code. But with that, I do think there is this power of the technology coming from AI to combat some of the threats from AI. We did a Google research survey last year, at the beginning of last year, and so this data is starting to become a little aged, but I think it's still relevant. I would predict that these numbers and statistics are much higher today if we were to conduct the same survey. This is available for free on the CSA website, but just emphasize some of the use cases of leveraging the power of these neural networks. Is the reasoning and logic we recognize is incredible with some of these GPTs. So it is already being used by 21% or more of the survey respondents for rules creation. So improving how and providing that more granular access control to an environment. Creative problem solving, looking at attack simulation. This is where red teams and purple teams are actually seeing and thinking more out of the box than maybe what they traditionally have done, and seeing other opportunities or other weaknesses they probably need to address within their systems and practice exercises against that. We also see regulatory adherence. So something obviously in financial services we deal with a lot around the documentation. I've actually seen this increase significantly since probably this survey was done, but pattern identification to see that if users are possibly requesting access that they should not have that authorization to receive, that the AI is being able to become a teacher and coach them as to and understand why they possibly were asking for that to begin with. And so there's a multiple level lessons learned here for how and how we can leverage generative AI. And then of course something that's been happened for quite a bit with machine learning in financial services is the ability to take such amount of large data sets and be able to synthesize it, go through that, be able to reverse identify where potential risks have occurred, where the root analysis is significantly better as a result of this. So these are just some of the examples of where we're starting to leverage generative AI. And with that, with both cloud and with AI, we are starting to see more and more regulation. You heard on the panel today with IBM and Microsoft and PayPal and Deutsche Börse, we see all of these thoughts of how we are going to successfully demonstrate good security practices to address DORA, the Digital Operation Resiliency Act. And with all of these acts coming or being proposed as bills, and I couldn't fit all of the potential codes and regulations on the screen, but the main things I saw across these regulations and where I heard from many CISOs and others that are trying to adhere to this very broad set of requirements, it really came down to 5 things that they consistently told me, which was there is a significant growing cost to achieve and demonstrate compliance. We have very much friction, so possibly conflicting types of requirements from all this international regulation, and trying to find a consistent alignment between states and countries that have possibly different laws. We have a technical complexity, so asking for this resiliency and having multiple types of cloud instances, which actually might not be feasible due to the resource cost and other things that might go into the complexity of understanding how on one cloud platform it won't operate, software as a service may not operate the same way. There's also that staff training that comes with that and the challenges of trying to have a full team that understands multiple platforms for good security. And then the challenge of having so much more documentation. How do you demonstrate and be continuously showing real-time transparency that the workloads that are in the cloud continue to be safe? So these are some of the challenges that I heard in the sessions today. And then from the opposite side, we're looking at all these guardrails. And I'll share just in the generative AI space, so much talk about what is a good guardrail that I can implement today to follow. Obviously, there is ISO 4200. That one is 42001 is actually one that I see as a consistently applied or talked about set of requirements. We, of course, have our AI controls matrix that is already out in the public view, and an entire program for STAR will be rolled out very shortly. But with all these frameworks, including CSAs, I see a set of very consistent principles that are always being covered within these requirements, and that is they're technically reliable and safe. They demonstrate privacy and good data governance. They have focus on ethical fairness and avoidance of bias as much as they can. A real emphasis on transparency of the shared responsibility, proactive risk identification and management. And then with all of them, there is this element of a need to have a good human oversight as well. So with that in mind, I'm just going to leave you with a couple of thoughts on some strategies that I have heard from industry that I think really resonate with myself and within these sessions. And that starts with having a good relevant company policy. The last time that we did a survey understanding where people's compliance with having a AI policy for the organization, it was at about 25%. And what scares me most about that, if you follow some of the Microsoft Trends report, they said that in one of their recent reports that 55% of users are using shadow AI without the knowledge of their manager. So think about that. 55% of enterprises have employees that see the value of using generative AI, but are doing that outside of the awareness of their manager. Not only is that a challenge for privacy and confidentiality of data, but we also have the challenge of the compute power. And I've heard stories of departments uploading new AI that was costing the organization as a whole $100,000, $200,000 in additional operational cost because they weren't aware of the computational requirements and costs that might derive from that. So having a company policy, having a very active champion within the company that is going to take responsibility for that is really an important step. The second is around contractual safeguards, making sure that you're reviewing the license agreements very carefully, that there is not a retention of that data, which is sometimes being seen, that the data is not only being used for the reasoning for the actual prompt, but is also being transferred back to possibly the frontier models owner. So make sure that you have these legally binding commitments to have that segmentation that they can't access and store your data for long periods of time, or that there's an ability for data handling and deletion of that data. Also, want to think about how you monitor for those shadow services. As I mentioned, I'll say it one more time because it's such a powerful number. 55% of employees, according to the Microsoft Trends report, are using some form of AI without their manager knowing. So being able to monitor for that shadow access is really important. Thorough code reviews of open source. I'm a big proponent of if you can use open source, the large language models that are out there are showing some great ability to compete with other frontier models. But if you do use them, the code is available, and you should be doing an additional heavy lift on reviewing that code. I'd also say we need to be able to mind the gap, having very clear segmentation from any type of external access that those large language models might have as they were to reach out or connect with the external internet and other types of connections that beyond what is planned for the scope. Sandboxing techniques through the user prompts. I do see a lot of interesting APIs and agents that are monitoring employees' prompts into private large language models within financial services, and then also monitoring the output. Did the large language model produce something that possibly does have bias or would go against company policy or would say something that would not be a company-related message? Also looking at model verification and automatic updates, I think is a really important aspect. One of the things that will be a challenge for us going forward in the security space is we have become very habitual about always updating to the latest version, because that usually means that there's better security in place, more thoughtful enhancement of how to protect or against malicious users and malicious types of activity. But with some of these large language models, the output could possibly be very different, as the model might be fine-tuned and weighted differently. The billions of parameters might have actually created a much different output than what we traditionally were expecting from this type of model. So something to be thoughtful of. The other thing to be conscious of is that we have all of this need for continuous testing of access, making sure that we have a zero trust methodology in place to always verify the use. We also need to think about confidential data and being able to protect that information as best as we can. So looking at fully homomorphic encryption, confidential computing, the enclaves that are available in the computing cloud space, to be able to actually operate with financial data and not have the ability for third parties to possibly access that information. Highly encourage you to look into our crypto working groups, in particular a confidential computing working group, to see if this is something of interest to you and your financial institution. And lastly, looking at independent audits. We'll soon have an entire program rolled out for our AI controls matrix here at CSA, but also look to ISO 42001 and other types of frameworks that already exist to have a good strategic plan in place for your AI rollout. And with that, I want to thank you for your time in discussing some of these lessons learned that I had from our FinCloud Security Summit. I'll leave you with one last slide, just focusing on our continuous automation revolution, looking at things that are coming. This is one of our new programs, our new initiatives for 2025. Very excited about all the big players that are involved. We are looking at some of the things in the industry, such as this large growing technology footprint within cloud services, within all the different data assets and global locations that might have sensitive information stored, looking at that data sprawl and the vast number of regulatory mandates that are growing. Highly encourage you to get involved in this initiatives. It will be looking at automation for scaling compliance. It'll be looking at the reducing duplicity of compliance mandates. So you're doing testing once to verify for multiple possible regulations, doing a positive correlation with risk reduction, identifying what controls are actually producing the best results and most security for your organization. And most importantly, real-time compliance. So you having this continuous auditing, monitoring, and validation that, yes, today I know the status and security posture of my organization. And then finally, what I really love about it is the simplified and accurate reporting that will be available to all external stakeholders. So there is a consistent expectation of what that reporting could look like, and an expectation that organizations will be able to provide that. So with that, I want to thank you for your time and attention today, and wish you a very happy 2025, and look forward to doing this again next year. Thank you.